Hey guys! Tonight we slip quietly into a world that looks colorful from the outside, but feels a lot less charming once you're standing in the pointed shoes yourself. You find yourself in the shadowed corridor of a medieval castle, the air cool against your arms, candles trembling along the stone walls like they're nervous for you. Somewhere ahead, you hear a burst of polite laughter, thin, strained, the kind people give when they're required to, not because the joke was actually funny. And that's your cue, of course, because tonight, you're the jester. The poor soul who has to walk into that hall and somehow make a room full of powerful nobles forget their boredom long enough not to have you escorted out the way livestock usually goes. It's already a lot, and we've barely started. Honestly, you probably won't survive this. Before we go any further though, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in bed, drifting into that soft pre-sleep haze, feel free to drop a comment with your location and your local time. It's always fun seeing where in the world everyone is falling asleep. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, the wooden soles of your shoes clicking against the stones. The castle is warmer the nearer you get to the main hall, and the scent of roasted meat, spilled wine, and about a dozen perfumes that really don't go together drifts toward you. You breathe it in, and the first joke of the night forms in your mind. Not because it's funny, but because it's the one least likely to get you thrown into a moat. Medieval jesters, after all, aren't just clowns. They're carefully balanced social tools. One misstep and your ha-ha funny man becomes ha-ha cautionary tale. That's your reality as the painted fool. A historian might tell you that the medieval jester's job was uniquely flexible. According to mainstream historical consensus, jesters weren't just entertainers, but also companions, messengers, and sometimes even advisors. The bright motley garments weren't always standard either. Some wore normal clothing until the Renaissance standardized the jester look in art. But quirks always evolve, and one peculiar detail some sources mention is the use of inflated animal bladders as slapsticks. Yes, you're about to walk into a hall waving a balloon full of cow innards. That's your life now. Try not to smirk as you imagine modern comedians with the same prop. It would really change the vibe of late-night TV. You approach the carved wooden doors. A guard gives you a curt nod, eyes already bored. You're not intimidating after all. You're basically the medieval version of a human playlist set to shuffle. He pushes the doors open, and warm light welcomes you in. The great hall stretches wide, filled with long wooden tables, jeweled goblets, and nobles who look like they've been sitting too long to remember how to smile naturally. The king sits at the far end, one hand draped lazily over the arm of his chair, expression hovering somewhere between mildly amused and please improve my mood before I make it somebody else's problem. As you enter, you're aware of every eye sliding toward you. Some expect entertainment, others expect chaos, and at least one expects you to fail. Probably Lord Raymond with the permanently puckered face, who hasn't liked anything since the invention of the spoon. You move through the room slowly, deliberately. Your outfit rustles, little bells chiming with every step, like you're a walking wind chime someone regrettably summoned. The sound helps soften the atmosphere a little. That's your job too. Lull, distract, redirect. You reach your small stage, which is really just a slightly cleared section of floor near the king. You take a breath and start with something gentle, light, and safe. A simple joke about the drafty corridors and how even the tapestries seem to be shivering tonight. A few chuckles, one genuine laugh from a servant near the back who immediately gets glared at by her superior. You keep going, adding small gestures and exaggerated expressions. Humor in this world isn't punchlines, it's rhythm, pacing, and a whole lot of physical comedy. There's something mesmerizing about watching others relax, even for a few seconds, as you lean into the character you've shaped. It's almost comforting, even though deep down you know the danger never really leaves. And it does cling to you, because jesters have always walked an unusual path in history. Some accounts say they were allowed to criticize kings more freely than anyone else. After all, who would take a fool seriously? Yet historians still argue whether jesters truly had license to speak truth, or whether that idea was exaggerated later by romantic storytellers. You can almost feel the debate tugging at your sleeve as you stand here deciding how far you can push your next punchline. A servant passes with a tray of bread. You gently pluck one, spin it, and balance it on your head. A small trick, nothing incredible, but the table closest to you smiles. Another joke forms in your mind, your second real joke of the section, and you toss it into the air with the bread before catching both. Not to brag, you mutter, but this is the most balanced diet I've had all week. A couple of nobles snort. The king smirks. Lord Raynham coughs disapprovingly, which honestly counts as laughter in his language.
It's not all comedy, though. You're a performer, and performers feel the room like a temperature shift. There's an undercurrent of tension, something political brewing, maybe a disagreement between nobles earlier in the day. You're supposed to smooth that out. You're the human distraction, the living reset button. So you start a small story, a parable wrapped in humor. Medieval jesters often used fables to diffuse conflict. It's one of the quieter, stranger truths about the profession. You tell yours with soft gestures, calming your voice to match the pre-sleep rhythm your listeners might admire. The hall shifts, shoulders drop, cups clink softly instead of angrily. And as you speak, you feel a strange mixture of power and vulnerability. You're indispensable and disposable at the same time. The castle relies on you to maintain mood, yet no one would hesitate to replace you if your jokes suddenly soured. It's a balancing act that demands constant attention, much like that bread still sitting on your head, bravely defying gravity. You set it down gently and bow with a quiet flourish. A small round of applause follows, more polite than enthusiastic, but enough to signal the first part of your night is a success. You breathe easier. Not much easier, but enough. The king leans forward slightly. "Continue," he murmurs, and the room waits for you to begin your next bit. And that's where we leave you for now, standing in the soft glow of torchlight, surrounded by people who expect you to be lighthearted, brilliant, harmless, and deeply entertaining, all at the same time. A job that seems colorful from afar, but up close is mostly pressure-wearing jingling bells. You linger near the corner of the hall for a breath, letting the laughter settle like dust after a passing cart. Your fingers drift over the familiar weight of your tools, each one tucked neatly where you can reach it without thinking. Being a jester isn't just about wit. You've already sensed that. It's also about tiny details, tiny preparations, and tiny objects that somehow keep you alive in a job where the wrong joke can end your employment and, occasionally, your existence. So tonight, as you drift out of the glow of the king's attention, you take a quiet mental inventory of your toolkit, the fool's arsenal you've spent years building, piece by piece. Your bells chime softly as you move, but even those are tools. They don't just add flair, they announce you. Medieval courts like to know when the jester was coming, and when they weren't. It gives people time to compose themselves, hide their gossip, or prepare to be entertained, depending on their mood.
And as you walk, you feel the faint tug of one bell that's always slightly off tune. You keep it that way on purpose. It becomes the third joke of this section as you mutter, "Well, at least one of us is consistently sharp," giving the bell a playful flick. A servant nearby hides a smile behind a tray. You head to the side bench where your props rest. To an outsider, it looks like a chaotic heap of nonsense. Sticks, cloth scraps, knotted ropes, carved wooden animals, juggling balls filled with sand, and, of course, your beloved bladder stick. It's not glamorous, but it's a classic. Mainstream history actually confirms its widespread use. A simple inflated animal bladder fixed to a stick used for slapstick comedy. Literally the origin of the word slapstick. And for a moment, you think about how future performers might owe their entire style of humor to this ridiculous object you now twirl casually in your hand. You test its weight, flicking it in a small arc before resting it on your shoulder. There's comfort in tools you've practiced with for years. Juggling balls molded perfectly to your grip. A tiny puppet with mismatched eyes. A lute missing 2 strings, your fault probably, but still capable of carrying a tune if you hold your breath and pray to every local saint who might be listening. But one of your most essential tools is invisible, your voice. Not just what you say, but how you say it. You clear your throat softly now, adjusting your pitch to something smooth, rhythmic, lightly teasing. A good jester can shift tone like a chameleon changes color, warm and silly one moment, cool and courteous the next. It's a skill you had to learn the hard way, by misjudging a noble's mood once and realizing sarcasm is not the universal language you hoped it was. You stretch your hands out, warming your fingers near a torch, preparing for your next performance volley. And as you prepare, your thoughts wander to the training that got you here. Some people believe jesters were simply born funny. But historians still argue whether jesters underwent formal apprenticeships or learned by being thrown into the deep end of public humiliation. You happen to know it's a bit of both. You once spent a year learning balance from a traveling tumbler and another year studying folktales with a monk who found your existence deeply peculiar. You smile at that memory and pick up a small carved bird, one of your quieter props. You squeeze it, and the tiny whistle inside gives a soft chirp. This little device is your secret weapon during slow banquets or tense political discussions. A subtle sound effect, nothing more, but powerful enough to nudge people toward laughter without you even stepping forward. You slip it into your sleeve, just in case. Behind you, nobles are shifting, settling, murmuring. The banquet is entering that lull between courses, where people grow restless and begin searching for something new to look at. And they find you, of course. You feel their eyes drifting toward your corner, like moths drawn to a lantern. Time to work again. You step forward, juggling balls in hand. The familiar weight steadies you. They're filled with a mix of barley and sand. Not too heavy, not too light. There's an old fringe claim, one that always makes you chuckle, that jesters sometimes filled juggling balls with the ashes of previous jesters for luck. You've never believed that, though if someone told you Lord Raymond's ancestor tried it, you wouldn't be shocked. You toss the first ball lightly into the air. The second follows, then the third. Your arms fall into their practiced circuit. Movements fluid despite the ache in your shoulder from an old injury involving a misjudged leap and a table of pastries you still pretend never happened. You let the balls arc higher, catching the torchlight, and you sense the crowd leaning in. Juggling isn't the height of medieval entertainment, but watching someone defy gravity always stirs the room. As you juggle, you talk, a multitasking skill you've refined over years of practice. You weave a small tale about a farmer trying to keep his chickens in line, punctuating each punchline with a quick toss of a ball. When the imaginary chickens scatter, one of the balls slips intentionally past your hand, bouncing off your elbow and landing neatly on the table of a nearby noble. The timing is precise. The nobles laugh. Even Lord Raymond's mouth twitches. Not that you dare count it as happiness. You retrieve the ball with a graceful bow, playing up the theatrics for an extra ripple of laughter. The king's mood lifts a fraction, and you can almost feel the tension in the room dissolve like sugar dropped in warm wine. It's working. But juggling isn't just for show. It's your shield. Something between you and the raw vulnerability of everyone staring at you, expecting you to be brilliant. You learned long ago that props can redirect a room's energy. If someone grows angry, you offer them a playful trick. If someone grows bored, you escalate the movement. If someone grows melancholy, you slow the rhythm and soften your tone. You catch the balls, one by one, tucking them away before retrieving the puppet, a tiny cloth figure, loosely modeled after the king, though not so closely that it would offend him. You wiggle its arms and exaggerate its voice. It's a gentle impression, not sharp enough to sting. The room chuckles again. You feel relief ripple through you like a warm draft from the hearth. Then, as you finish your little puppet exchange, you make the mistake of stepping off your usual spot, and your foot lands on a goblet someone left too close to the floor. You don't fall, but you do hop awkwardly, making the accidental motion look like a planned dance step. The hall bursts into soft laughter. You turn the mistake into a flourish, arms extended, bowing deeply. Humor born from chaos, your specialty. It reminds you of a truth every jester knows. Sometimes accidents become your best bit, and sometimes they become the incident that ends your career. One misstep, one wrong word, one joke aimed too high. You feel that fragile balance every time you perform. It's why your toolkit matters, why every prop is chosen carefully, why every gesture is rehearsed until it feels like breathing. Because beneath the bells and the painted smile, you're not just a funny person. You're a strategist, a mood leader, a diplomat disguised as a clown. And as you tuck the puppet back into place, you take a slow breath, knowing the night is far from over. Your tools are ready, your voice is warmed. The court watches you with a mix of expectation and amusement. You lift your bladder stick with a small, knowing grin and step back into the center of the hall. Time to use the toolkit for real. You ease yourself back toward the center of the hall, bells chiming lightly with each step. There's a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The musicians have quieted, the nobles have settled into expectant stillness, and the king's gaze has fixed on you with the kind of weight that makes your spine straighten on instinct. This is the moment every jester knows too well, when humor becomes a razor's edge, and you're expected to dance along it like it's a silk ribbon instead of a danger line. You can juggle, tumble, sing, and flail all you want, but nothing you do compares to the real centerpiece of the jester's craft, royal humor. Humor aimed upward. Humor where the punchline grazes the throne just enough to tease, but not so much that it bruises. You take a breath, steadying yourself. This is the art that makes or breaks you. You stand before the king now, the hall listening with the sort of attention normally reserved for war declarations or new dessert arrivals. The king lifts his goblet ever so slightly, signaling he's ready. Ready to be amused, yes, but also ready to judge. You begin with something light, a tiny observational joke about how the feast has so many courses that the plates look tired. The room exhales a ripple of laughter, soft, polite, safe. The king lifts one eyebrow. Good. That's the eyebrow of approval, not annoyance. You've learned the difference after far too many experiments. Royal humor is its own battlefield, A mainstream fact you've probably heard is that medieval jesters had a unique privilege. They could tease the king in ways no one else dared. They could point out hypocrisies, flaws, or moods, wrapped safely in the bubble wrap of comedy. But here's the fringe truth you've learned firsthand. Some kings only pretended to enjoy it. Some had fragile egos that cracked like thin ice under too much pressure. And some liked the mockery a little too much, turning jesters into scapegoats for their own frustrations. Historians still argue whether jesters were truly valued for their boldness or merely tolerated as amusing distractions, safe only as long as they hit the exact right nerve. You stand here now, feeling the truth of that debate wash over you like cold water. Your next joke needs more finesse. So you step gently into a playful impersonation of the king's royal hunting stance. Not the real stance, oh no, that would be dangerous. But a softened, exaggerated version where your arms stiffen like puppets and your face contorts in concentration as if the deer should be flattered by the attention. It's harmless enough that the king chuckles, but sharp enough that the court feels the thrill of watching you tread close to a line. A wave of warmth passes through the hall. You did it. You skimmed the surface without diving too deep. You let your smile linger, welcoming the small breeze of confidence that comes with surviving another minute. But you're not done. The king leans back slightly, eyes narrowing in amusement. Not suspicion, thank goodness, but interest. He wants more. He wants that delicious tension, that dance around dangerous subjects, that flirtation with the forbidden. And you need to deliver, because nothing turns a court sour like a jester who suddenly goes shy. So you step a bit closer and soften your voice. Your Majesty, you begin, letting the phrase stretch out with a hint of reverence. I saw the way the falcon looked at you today. I believe she's ready to propose. A braver joke, but not reckless. The king's shoulders shake with genuine laughter. The nobles follow suit, some out of amusement, others out of self-preservation. Lord Raymond, of course, maintains his perennial expression of someone smelling very old cheese. But even he lets out a soft grunt that might have once been laughter in a past life. With the laughter flowing, the pressure eases slightly. You shift into a small skit about an imaginary court advisor who speaks in riddles because he always forgets his actual advice. A not-so-subtle nod to one of the king's real advisors, but gentle enough that even the man himself relaxes with a smile. That, right there, is one of your greatest weapons, making the powerful feel included, teased, seen, but never targeted. You glide between jokes like stepping stones. Each one requires careful footwork. A slip here is not like slipping on a jug of ale. It's a career hazard. Or, in rarer and more unfortunate cases, a physical hazard. After all, medieval nobles weren't known for their measured responses. It's why jesters learn to read the room better than scholars read manuscripts. You shift your weight, bells chiming softly, and toss in your second light joke of the section. If the treasury grows any heavier, sire, we may need to entertain the idea of adding wheels to it. You nudge the air with your elbow. That way, the tax collectors can chase you for once. The king lets out another hearty laugh. Thank goodness. One wrong, king, and you would have been escorted out for suggesting he share the load. But tonight, he's in a generous mood. You decide to push just a fraction further, the tiniest nudge into real satire. You raise your bladder stick, tapping it lightly against your shoulder. If I may be bold, Your Majesty, you say, I believe the kingdom is growing wiser each day. Just yesterday, I overheard two pigeons arguing over tax policy. A ripple of warm laughter again.
birds making tax decisions. Harmless, silly, and just political enough to feel clever without landing you in trouble. Perfect.
Still, beneath your outward confidence, your stomach coils with tension. The dance is exhilarating, yes, but also exhausting. You feel constantly pulled between the need to entertain and the need to survive. It's like walking on a rope stretched above a pool filled not with water, but with nobles holding long lists of grievances. The musicians begin to play again, their strings humming softly. This helps shift the tone of the room, making your job momentarily easier. You let the music swell behind you as you move into a more physical bit, something involving exaggerated prancing, tiny hops, and a parody of the stiff greetings nobles give one another when they pretend to like each other. The hall delights in this. Everyone recognizes themselves or someone they know in your mimicked bows. Humor thrives on recognition, after all. You let your third little joke slip out as you demonstrate a particularly stiff, noble greeting. And this, you announce solemnly, is the traditional bow of two people who despise each other but share the same tailor. It gets a full round of laughter, even from the tailor himself, who's learned to laugh at noble egos for the sake of business. Your body relaxes, just slightly. You've managed to toe the line again without falling off. It's a victory, even if temporary.
Yet you're acutely aware of how unpredictable royal humor can be. A jest that earns applause tonight might earn silence tomorrow, or offense the day after. Moods shift like seasons, and jesters must shift with them. You've heard tales, whispered, never confirmed, of jesters who miscalculated a joke and found themselves dismissed, imprisoned, or even disappeared from the historical record. Maybe those are only stories, maybe not. In this line of work, the border between fact and cautionary tale is always blurry.
You lower your prop gently, stepping back with a modest bow. The king raises his goblet in your direction, a gesture of satisfaction. You've pleased him tonight, and for a jester, that means you've earned another few hours of breathing space. You return to the edge of the hall, letting the warm buzz of laughter fade behind you. But even as you withdraw, you know this is only the beginning of the night's razor walk. Because the next time the king looks your way, the dance will begin again. You slip back toward your familiar patch of open floor, feeling the warmth of the recent laughter fading from your skin like sunlight slipping behind a cloud. It's always like this, the brief glow of approval, followed by that quiet, creeping awareness that you're still one misstep away from the mood turning. Because being a court jester isn't just about amusing the king, it's also about something far less glamorous, living as the designated target of daily mockery.
You can still hear a few nobles snickering about your puppet impression, but the tone has already shifted. Their laughter is no longer at the puppet, it's at you, the fool, the entertainer, the person they've been socially permitted to mock without consequence. You breathe out slowly. This part? This is the part no one ever paints in the bright oils of manuscript margins.
Your bells jingle softly as you lean against the edge of a pillar. The fabric of your motley costume scratches a little against your neck, not uncomfortably, just enough to remind you you're wearing something deliberately silly. Clothes designed to make people smile before you even open your mouth. You tug lightly at the sleeve, smoothing the fabric. A tiny reflex, but one that grounds you. A pair of squires pass by, whisper laughing as they mimic your juggling stance. The impression is terrible. They look more like windmill blades fighting for survival than anything you actually did. But the point isn't accuracy. It's the fact that they can do it, and you're expected to smile along like you enjoy being the butt of the joke. Which, to be fair, sometimes you do. Sometimes it's harmless, a little reminder that humor goes both ways. Other times, Well, other times it's a reminder that you're low on the social ladder, no matter how much the king enjoys your company. You stroll toward a side table for a sip of ale, the cup cool against your palm. As you drink, a noblewoman leans over just enough to murmur, "Careful now, fool. Don't drink too much, or your jokes may finally make sense." She smiles sweetly as she says it, the kind of smile people sharpen like a blade. You chuckle politely, because what else can you do? A gentle joke in return, maybe. "Ah, my lady," you murmur, "if my jokes begin making sense, then we'll truly know we're in strange times." You tilt your head just right, charm softening the edge. She laughs, not kindly, but pleasantly enough to move on. You let the moment drift away. Mainstream history often speaks of jesters being beloved companions, confidants of kings, figures of light-hearted entertainment. And some of that is true. But there's another truth tucked quietly beneath the layers. Jesters frequently bore the brunt of court ridicule. Some records say they were teased relentlessly, their mistakes remembered far longer than their triumphs. Being the fool wasn't just a job. It was an identity projected onto you from the outside, every single day. A peculiar tidbit you once heard, half fact, half legend, but amusing nonetheless, claims that some jesters wore donkey ears not just in performances, but as their everyday hat, a kind of permanent costume. You don't know if anyone actually did that, but as you stand in your bells and motley, you can imagine someone in history shrugging and deciding, "Well, this is my life now," as they tied on the ears for breakfast. A servant approaches with a fresh tray of pastries, and you help yourself to a small honey tart. As you bite into it, someone behind you mimics your little juggling accident from earlier, exaggerated, dramatic, wildly off the mark. A few nobles laugh. You feel heat prickling behind your ears. But instead of shrinking back, you use the moment. You pivot, turn toward them, and with an exaggerated bow, you say, "My deepest thanks for your tribute. I assure you, my fall was far more graceful." This earns a real laugh. Even the nobles doing the mocking smile sheepishly. Turning mockery into comedy, that's one of your most powerful tools. It takes the sting out of their jab and redirects it back into something playful, harmless, shared. Still, the pressure builds over time. You feel it tonight as you drift through the hall, your posture carefully relaxed, your smile soft but present. You're not allowed to have an off night. If a noble wakes up annoyed, or embarrassed, or simply bored, you may very well be the easiest target for deflection. One noble, Sir Wenton, known affectionately by the court as Sir Wines-a-Lot, waves you over with the lazy authority of someone who has never lifted anything heavier than his own ego. "Jester," he slurs, "tell us again about that time you fell into the moat." You blink. You have absolutely no recollection of falling into a moat, which means he's referring to the time you almost fell into a moat, which in Sir Wenton's retelling has become an epic splash, a dramatic rescue, and at least one confused duck. You decide to lean into it. "Of course, my lord," you say brightly, "though between us, the duck tells the story better." Another tiny joke to keep the mood gentle. Someone nearby asks if you quacked as you went in, and you can't help it, you let out your best duck impression. The table erupts in laughter. A little silly, yes, a little demeaning, maybe, but the sound of laughter, even at your expense, does something weirdly comforting. It's not the mockery itself, it's the knowledge that you've steered it into safer waters, redirected it, molded it. But it still takes its toll. You wander back toward the main hearth, letting the heat warm your hands. Your face aches slightly from smiling, a tension you know all too well. Being cheerful for hours on end is like balancing a tray of hot soup. You can do it, yes, but one slip and everything burns. Historians still argue whether jesters genuinely enjoyed their roles or whether their joy was simply another performance. As you watch the fire's shadows dance along the stone floor, you think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. You enjoy the laughter. You enjoy making people happy. But you also carry the weight of being everyone's safe target, the recipient of jokes no one else is brave or foolish enough to absorb. Nearby, 2 pages whisper about you. Not cruelly, just speculating on whether you sleep in the stables or a tower room. Spoiler, neither. Your room is a tiny alcove nested between the laundry room and the corridor that always smells faintly of onions. Luxury in its own quirky way. You let your mind drift for a moment, taking in the warmth, the voices, the soft melodies of lutes plucking in the background. There's something oddly peaceful about being the fool, if you frame it right. You're part of the court's fabric, woven into the everyday tapestry. Not quite noble, not quite servant, somewhere in between. Visible but overlooked. Important but expendable. And sometimes, yes, you're the one mocked. But sometimes that mockery becomes a shared laugh, a moment of connection, a reminder that you're the one who can lighten heavy hearts without lifting a sword or signing a decree. That matters more than nobles will ever say aloud. You shake the last crumbs of pastry from your fingers, sigh softly, and straighten. Because the night isn't done, and the court will soon want something new from you. You wake before the sun again, because that's the unwritten rule of your new existence. Jesters don't get to sleep in. Not because anyone tells you this directly, but because your days start whenever someone else decides they want to be amused, which usually happens the moment a rooster crows or a guard drops his helmet on a stone floor. So you stretch inside your tiny corner of the servants' loft, the straw poking your back like nature's alarm clock, and realize you're already slightly behind schedule, if jesters can even have a schedule. Mostly, it's more like a rolling stream of small indignities that you simply drift through, hoping not to drown. A mainstream historical fact, medieval courts truly did treat jesters as fixtures rather than guests. You're not quite staff, not quite entertainment property, and definitely not someone whose time is respected. So you slip on the motley, still itchy, still loud, still impossible to ignore, even though every person in the castle assured you it was standard jester issue, and trudge down to the great hall. The air is cold and heavy, and the stone floor sends a chill up your legs as you walk. You hear the first clatter of kitchen work somewhere behind the walls, and you smell today's breakfast stew, which is being heated to a temperature historians still argue whether was hot enough to count as safe. You suspect not, judging by how often someone in the castle is coughing. You sit near a bench, but not on it, because benches are weirdly political objects in a medieval court. Sitting on one without permission could get you in trouble, and you've already learned that you're safest standing, kneeling, hovering, or folding yourself like one of those wooden figurines used for sketching. The first small indignity of the day arrives early. You must warm up your jester voice. You practice a few jokes under your breath. Nothing complicated, just simple rhymes, some clumsy wordplay, and a joke about the steward's bald head that you absolutely cannot say aloud unless you want to lose your job and possibly a tooth. You also rehearse a few exaggerated gestures, the ones the queen likes. The sweeping bow, the floppy-limbed stumble, the "oops, I dropped the imaginary chicken again" routine. Yes, that's the QWERTY tidbit. Imaginary chickens were apparently a thing. Some jesters used props, some didn't, but the idea of miming everyday objects for laughs was surprisingly common. You imagine juggling imaginary chickens, which feels doubly humiliating because you're miming something that technically doesn't even exist. Your day begins in earnest when a page appears and says, "They're ready for you." without elaborating who they are. They could mean the king, the queen, the nobles who enjoy watching you attempt riddles before breakfast, or the children who want to poke your hat bells. So you follow the page into the Great Hall, where the nobles sit under banners that look grander than their personalities. You start with something safe, a small rhyme about the weather, a little dance, a quiet joke about how winter is like a knight who refuses to take a hint and leave the party. It's not hilarious, but it gets a mild snort out of someone, and incredibly, that's a win. As the day unfolds, you discover the true core of your jester routine, never letting your face relax. You keep a small, pleasant smile, even when your jaw starts to ache, even when your eyelids droop, even when someone makes comments that would definitely earn them a smack if they weren't nobility. You smile through it all because that's what's expected. You're the castle's walking mood balancer, smoothing over the rough edges of daily political boredom with silly stories, juggled pebbles, half-true rumors, or the occasional acrobatic roll across the floor. Your tasks are scattershot. One moment you're telling a story about a farmer who accidentally married a goat, loosely based on a real medieval folktale, because why not? The next moment you're standing next to the king, whispering funny commentary during a dull diplomatic greeting. You talk to the courtiers as though you're not terrified, giving quick jokes that they can repeat later and pretend they came up with. You've accepted that part of your role is to provide borrowable humor, and honestly, you're too tired to fight it. Later in the morning, the steward finds you and hands you a broom. Not because jesters were expected to clean, your job is technically entertainment, but because you happen to be standing within the steward's line of sight, which makes you fair game. You sweep the long hallway, bells jingling with every motion, and try to ignore how your reflection in a polished shield looks like someone who might have made a series of life choices too quickly. A group of children gather to watch you, whispering excitedly. You do a small twirl to amuse them, and one of them tosses a berry at your hat. You pretend to dramatically faint, which makes them shriek with laughter. It's harmless, it's sweet, and it's probably the easiest part of your day. Children have low expectations, bless them. All they want is someone who makes funny faces. You can do funny faces all day. Then comes the midday monotony, which is somehow more exhausting than the morning rush. You sit near the kitchens again, waiting for someone to summon you. Sometimes you're forgotten for hours, which sounds peaceful but isn't, because the entire time you must remain ready. Your posture must stay straight, your hat must stay on, your expression must remain light and pleasant, even though the only audience is a bucket of eels being kept alive for tonight's feast. You hum quietly to yourself to stay awake. You think about sneaking a nap, but then you remember yesterday's scolding, and the day before that, and the time before that, when you actually did fall asleep and woke up with a child trying to braid your eyelashes. After lunch, you act as comic relief during a debate among nobles about land boundaries. No one really cares what you say, but your asides help keep tempers from flaring. You make a joke about how the disputed field is probably just tired of being argued over and wants a vacation. Someone chuckles, someone else rolls their eyes, someone else throws a grape at you. Honestly, that's pretty good as far as jester jobs go. As the day winds down, you're called to the courtyard to perform a short physical routine for travelers visiting the castle. You juggle stones, balance on a small beam, and pretend to be chased by an invisible boar, another callback to your growing collection of imaginary animals. It goes well enough, though one stone does hit your shin, and you pretend it was part of the act. Pain is temporary, but embarrassment is forever, and you try to avoid both when possible. By twilight, you're staggering back upstairs to your loft, every muscle stiff, every thought fuzzy. Your bells seem louder at night somehow. You take off the motley and fold it carefully, partly because you need it tomorrow, and partly because it's the only thing in this castle that's yours, even if it humiliates you daily. As you lie down on the straw again, staring at the beams above,
you realize another small indignity. The castle quiets for everyone except you. Somewhere, a noble is probably still telling your jokes. Somewhere, a child is retelling your stories. Somewhere, a cook is laughing about your broom routine. And you're just hoping tomorrow is slightly less exhausting.
But it won't be. You wake to the unmistakable sound of a guard yelling something about the stables, which is impressive considering you are indoors and 2 floors up. Your eyes open slowly, the straw mattress wrestling with your hair like a jealous pet, and before you even sit up fully, you hear it, the jingle. Instead of birds chirping or a gentle breeze or even a rooster, the first sound you get every morning is the lonely, slightly sarcastic chime of your own hat bells. They mock you a little, honestly. They always do. Today's the day you learn another universal medieval truth. The care and feeding of the costume is the care and feeding of the jester. Because if you thought the motley was annoying to wear, wait until you get to maintain it. You roll out of bed, or more accurately, you pour yourself out of it. The motley waits for you in its slightly wilted, slightly tragic heap on the floor where you folded it last night. A mainstream historical fact, these outfits were not soft. They were not flexible, and they were definitely not made with comfort in mind. Wool, rough linen, cheap dyes that sometimes stained your skin, this is the fashion statement you live with. The bright colors mark you out instantly, and if you ever tried to blend into a crowd, you'd fail spectacularly. But blending in is not what a jester does. You are a wandering spotlight, a mobile entertainment unit, a human lantern wearing a pattern that screams, "Please stare at me." You pick up the tunic and notice immediately that something is off. One of the seams, right along the side, has come loose. Not all the way, but enough that if you perform even the smallest cartwheel, which your job requires, the entire thing might split open like an overripe fruit. You do not have time for overripe fruit level embarrassment today, so you grab the small sewing kit the laundress gave you. Not because jesters were expected to sew, but because she got tired of repairing your outfit every time someone grabbed the fabric for a joke tug. As you sit beside your straw bed and thread a needle, the morning light spills across your hands. It's peaceful for about 2 seconds, and then the bells attached to your sleeves tinkle every time you shift. They're not huge bells, not like the kind used on horses or church doors, but even the tiny ones multiply their sound across stone walls. You fix the seam carefully, sticking your finger only twice, progress, and admire your crude but functional repair. You make a mental note. If you ever quit jester life, maybe you could pivot to sewing. Maybe open a small shop somewhere. Sell tunics that don't make people uncomfortable. But you know better already. Career changes were not really an option for someone in your social position. Still, it's a comforting fantasy. Once the motley is repaired, you put it on, adjusting the neckline and tugging the sleeves, and then comes the task you dread, bell inspection. Each bell must be checked to ensure it hasn't cracked, bent, or filled with mud from yesterday's courtyard performance. A quirky tidbit, some jesters used bells not just for performance, but as a subtle way to announce themselves when approaching nobles. Part convenience, part safety mechanism. After all, if people can hear you coming, they're less likely to be startled and accuse you of sneaking. Unfortunately, it also makes it impossible for you to walk anywhere without sounding like a decorative cat. Your bells pass inspection, though one is slightly dented. You toy with replacing it, but decide against it. A dented bell has character. It's practically autobiographical. Next, grooming. You splash cold water onto your face from the shared wash basin, gasping a little at the sudden chill. You smooth your hair back, thankfully it's short enough not to rebel, and check for any crumbs or stray feathers stuck to you from yesterday's antics. You find a feather behind your ear, probably from the steward's ridiculous hat. You toss it aside. Shoes. Your jester shoes have slightly curled toes, not exaggerated like later theatrical depictions, but enough to look whimsical. They are also worn down nearly to nothing on the soles. You patch them with scraps of leather, hammer them lightly with a borrowed wooden spoon, and hope today doesn't involve treading on anything sharp. No promises. Courtyards are basically gravel, tiny rocks, and disappointment. Before you leave your loft, you also check your small prop pouch. You have 3 key items today: a couple of stones for juggling, a tiny wooden puppet you carved on a very boring afternoon, and a bit of ribbon for sleight of hand tricks. This is your minimalist toolkit. Other jesters had more elaborate props. Some had mock scepters, others had puppets or stuffed animals, or even contraptions involving spoons and string. But you're still working your way up. Also, the steward keeps accidentally confiscating anything larger than a handkerchief. You head upstairs to the roof walk, because part of caring for your outfit is letting it air out. Yes, today you're learning an unglamorous truth. Your clothing smells. Everyone's clothing smells. Laundry is not a daily affair. Your motley needs fresh air like a medieval fish market needs fewer fish. So there you stand, leaning against the crenellations, letting the morning wind sweep the worst of yesterday's odors away. You are essentially a colorful windsock with opinions. While you're up there, you take a quiet moment for yourself. It's one of the few advantages of jester life. You're allowed to be anywhere and nowhere. No one questions why you're on the roof walk. You're the jester. You do things. From here, you see the village waking up. Smoke rises from chimneys, chickens scatter. A dog barks at something that probably doesn't exist. You imagine what it would be like to live outside the castle, to have a job that requires neither bells nor contortions, nor smiling through insults. Historians still argue whether jesters enjoyed more freedom than common laborers, or whether their freedom was just another flavor of dependence. Looking out at the village, you suspect the latter. After airing out, you head back downstairs, bells chiming at every step. You check the mirror, well, the polished metal plate used as a mirror, and adjust your hat. The hat is the keystone of your identity. If your hat looks wrong, the whole illusion collapses. Today, it's slightly crooked, and you debate whether that makes the joke funnier or just sadder. You straighten it anyway. Finally, with the costume spotless-ish, patched, jingling properly, and smelling less like a medieval feast gone wrong, you're ready to face the court again. On your way to the hall, a guard says, "Nice bells." That's the closest thing to a compliment you'll get before noon. You take it. The motley is your armor, your uniform, your burden, your brand. And despite how uncomfortable it is, how demoralizing, how ridiculous you feel wearing it, it's also the one thing the castle recognizes you for. Without it, you'd just be another tired face, another servant, another nobody. But with it, you're the jester. And today, like every day, the bells say who you are before you even open your mouth. You're barely 3 steps into the great hall when you hear the steward call your name. Not loudly, not angrily, just with that particular tone reserved for tasks no one else wants to do. Your morning routine of stitching, airing, straightening, and pretending not to be exhausted is over. Now comes the true core of your existence, wandering the castle all day like a brightly dressed, problem-solving pigeon. The steward waves a hand at a long parchment sprawled across a table. "We need someone to read this aloud," he says, already turning away. Everyone else is busy. You look around. Everyone else is very much not busy. But you are the jester, which in this unusual social hierarchy means you are both unimportant and perpetually available. So your day begins with you standing in front of a cluster of irritated scribes, holding a list of grain shipments that would bore even the most desperate insomniac. You read it aloud in a calm, steady tone, your performer's voice, just softer. The scribes take notes. One yawns. You fight the urge to ask if they want a bedtime story, but you decide to save that joke for later. Jesters often doubled as messengers, errand runners, or informal assistants because they floated between groups. You weren't nobility, but you weren't a typical servant either. You were a curious, in-between creature, part entertainer, part distraction, part convenient extra pair of hands. That awkward liminal position made you strangely useful for 100 small jobs that didn't have clear owners. Once the grain list is finished, someone else hands you a message to carry to the cook. Then the cook gives you a stack of wooden bowls to deliver to the armory. Then the armorer sends you to fetch a lost dog that isn't lost, just sleeping under a bench. You spend 20 minutes coaxing it out, jingling your bells like a one-person parade, while the dog stares at you with the deep, unimpressed patience of a creature judging your life decisions. By the time the dog is reunited with its owner, you've walked more laps around the castle than most guards do in a day. Your bells haven't stopped once. They mark your progress like tiny, somewhat mocking footsteps. At midday, you're asked to help with the washing. Not because jesters are expected to do laundry, quite the opposite, but because the laundresses think you're funny and the steward thinks you're idle. You carry armfuls of damp linens to the courtyard, where the breeze can dry them. The laundresses chat around you. One asks you to tell a joke, so you quickly deliver one about a knight whose armor squeaked so much everyone mistook him for a mouse. They laugh. You bow. Your bells jingle approvingly. While you're outside, you take a moment to look up. The sky is pale blue, the air crisp, and for a brief second you feel almost peaceful. Then a bird lands on your hat and pecks at one of your bells. You sigh. Nature truly has no respect for the arts. You return indoors, and before your foot even crosses the threshold, a noblewoman says, "Jester, we need you!" You brace yourself, expecting a clever request, or at least a humorous one. Instead, she hands you a basket filled with embroidered napkins and says, "Take these to the queen, and don't drop them, and walk nicely." Walk nicely, as though your bells offer any stealth or dignity. But you do your best, holding the basket like it contains fragile glass instead of sturdy cloth. The halls echo with every step. A guard snickers. A maid whispers, "Careful," as though the napkins are royal infants. The queen receives the basket without looking up. She mutters a distracted "thank you," then asks if you can run downstairs and fetch the lady-in-waiting who misplaced a bracelet. You go. Of course you go. You're already halfway out the door before your brain catches up. This is what your life has become. A relay race. Except no one is timing it, and no one cares who wins. A quirky tidbit pops into your head as you walk. Some jesters were officially titled King's Shadow, meaning they were expected to follow royalty everywhere. You have no such title, but you sometimes feel like an unofficial shadow anyway. You exist in the peripheral spaces, the transitional moments, the gaps where no one else wants to stand. You find the lady-in-waiting, retrieve her bracelet, it was sitting on a table, deeply unlost, and bring her back upstairs. She thanks you with a slice of preserved apple, which is the closest thing you've had to a treat all week. You savor it like it's a rare delicacy. Technically, it is. You barely finish chewing when another voice says, "Jester, a moment." You turn, it's the castle tutor, holding a stack of scrolls. "Can you take these to the library? Carefully, very carefully." You nod solemnly, holding the scrolls like ancient treasure. This is where the open scholarly debate phrase slips perfectly into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether jesters enjoyed unusual intellectual access because they wandered everywhere, or whether they merely passed through interesting rooms without ever actually benefiting. You walk through the library, inhaling the dry, warm scent of parchment and ink, and wonder which category you fall into. You appreciate the books, but you're not encouraged to touch them without permission. You're trusted with scroll delivery, not scroll study. You organize the scrolls on a table, straighten them instinctively, and leave before anyone thinks to ask why you're still there. Back in the hallway, the steward intercepts you again. "We need the high table set for tonight's meal," he says, thrusting a stack of plates into your arms. You balance them precariously, bells jingling with each wobble. You walk carefully, hyper-aware of every step, and place the plates onto the linen-covered table. You're adjusting a knife when a nobleman strides in and says, "Ah, Jester, perfect timing. Could you run and fetch my boots?" You blink. "Your boots, my lord?" "Yes, the muddy ones. I need them cleaned before supper." You resist the urge to ask him why you should clean something full of dirt he created, but you nod. There's nothing else to say. You find the boots in his chamber. They're heavy, wet, and smell like ancient swamp secrets. You carry them back to the servants' washing area where a boy scrubs them clean. The boy hands them back to you and you return them to the noble man, who says, "Good, now don't forget to be funny later." You won't. You never do. Even after all the errands, all the running, all the stairs, all the bells. Humor is the one part of your job that belongs fully to you. Late afternoon arrives. Your feet ache. Your hat feels like it's slowly migrating sideways. You've fetched, carried, swept, delivered, hunted, lugged, chased, cleaned, and juggled, accidentally, when someone dropped fruit and you caught it without thinking. For a moment, standing in the quiet hallway, you try to remember everything you did today. You lose track quickly. The Jester's Day is not a list of big tasks. It's a mosaic of tiny requests, scattered like breadcrumbs across every corridor. You realize something else, too. This constant running around, this endless chain of errands, is what makes you part of the castle's rhythm. You're the colorful thread woven through everyone's day, doing the jobs that aren't quite important enough for anyone else. And even though your feet hurt and your bells won't stop jingling, and you've already forgotten the last time you sat down, deep down, you know you keep the entire place moving. Or at least you make it slightly less dull, which, in a medieval castle, is practically a miracle. By the time your errands finally slow down, you realize you haven't had a proper moment to simply exist without someone pointing at you like a misplaced tool. So, when the steward tells you, "Jester, you may go entertain the guards for a bit," you hear it for what it truly is, the closest thing to a break you're going to get all day. Entertaining the guards is technically still work, but it is, miraculously, the least stressful kind. Guards have simple tastes. They like jokes about food, jokes about weather, jokes about other guards, and jokes about how bored they are. You can handle that. You could handle that in your sleep, honestly. And sometimes you suspect you have handled it in your sleep. You shuffle toward the guard room, bells chiming at each step. The heavy wooden door creaks open with the slowness of someone reluctantly waking up. Inside, the guards lounge around a long table, eating bread, sharpening weapons, or staring into the middle distance with the blank expression of people who have been standing still for most of their adult lives. "Jester!" one of them calls, brightening instantly. "Do the thing!" You know exactly which thing he means. The wobbling leg dance you invented by accident 2 weeks ago when you stepped on a pebble and almost fell into the water bucket. It became an instant favorite. Of course it did. You perform the wobbling leg routine, wobbling from foot to foot as though struggling against a very small, very personal earthquake. The guards laugh, deep, hearty, honest laughter that fills the room like warm stew. Their laughter always feels different. It's not polite like a noble's chuckle. It's not indulgent like the court children's giggles. It's not political or strategic or half-hearted. It's real. That's the first moment today you feel your shoulders loosen. One guard leans back and says, "Tell us a story, something ridiculous." I clear my throat and dive into a tale about a knight who tried to impress a lady by fighting a goose, only to discover the goose was both faster and meaner than anticipated. The guards roar. One slaps the table so hard a cup topples. Another wipes tears from his eyes. You add an exaggerated impression of the goose, head bobbing, honking, flapping, and at this point, half the men are choking on their bread.
A mainstream historical fact flits into your mind as you perform. Guards were often among the jesters' most appreciative audiences because they desperately needed relief from long hours of monotony. A little levity kept them awake and alert. They loved you for being the unofficial antidote to boredom. As they laugh, you sit on an overturned bucket, sip a bit of watered wine someone offers, and feel, for the briefest moment, like you belong somewhere. The conversation shifts. They start asking questions. Not serious ones, not political ones, fun ones. Jester, what's the strangest thing you've ever seen in the castle?
And they lean in. You tell them about the time you walked into the storage room and found the steward arguing with a sack of grain as though it had personally insulted him. The guards wheeze with laughter. You add a reenactment of the steward's offended posture, and now they're crying again. Someone asks if you can juggle their helmets. You decline, joking that your health insurance doesn't cover death by metal. That gets another round of laughter. It feels good. It feels human. But like everything pleasant in your jesterly existence, it ends too soon. A messenger pokes his head in. The king wants the jester. The guards groan. They boo the messenger. Not loudly enough to get punished, but loud enough to express their disappointment. "Come back later," one guard says, waving you off like a cherished pet. "I'll try," you say, though you already know you won't get the chance. You head toward the king's solar, bells chiming again in that familiar, faintly mocking rhythm. The king sits by the window, parchment spread before him, a quill in hand. He looks tired. Royalty gets stressed too, you've learned, just with different problems and much nicer chairs. He gestures for you to come closer. "I need distraction," he says simply.
And that is the moment you realize something. Your role with the king is different from your role with the guards. With the guards, you're one of them, an equal in laughter, an equal in boredom, an equal in shared misery. But with the king, you are not an equal. You are a pressure valve, a disposable one. Still, you sit quietly at his feet, performing small tricks. You juggle your stones, you hum a tune. You tell a short tale about a man who tried to count raindrops and gave up after 3. The king's lips twitch. That's victory.
He asks you questions, not about politics, not about duty, but about the small oddities of daily life around the castle. You answer in your usual half-sincere, half-sarcastic tone. He relaxes incrementally. You watch his shoulders drop, his jaw unclench. He doesn't laugh loudly, but he smiles. And you realize this is your most important duty of all. A quirky tidbit that always fascinates you: some jesters were the only people allowed to speak bluntly to their rulers. Not rudely, never rudely, but pointedly. You test that boundary gently now. When the king grumbles about nobles bickering over land, you shrug and say, "My lord, if they spent as much time working their fields as they spend arguing over them, they might actually grow something useful." The king huffs a small, reluctant laugh. Your bells give a triumphant jingle. After half an hour, he waves you away. "Go," he says, but stay nearby. You bow, stepping backward carefully, your bells make a soft farewell, and slip into the hallway. You don't have long before someone else finds you. This time, it's the castle minister, wanting help rehearsing a humorless speech. You listen, nod, suggest a few ways to make it less dry, and watch him ignore all your suggestions except the worst one. Some men simply cannot be helped. Then comes dinner prep. You're instructed to stand near the Great Hall door and greet guests with mildly amusing banter. One noblewoman asks why your outfit is so bright. You tell her it helps the king find you quickly when he needs a laugh. She seems delighted by this, which surprises you because it wasn't meant to be funny. Another noble asks if your bells ever get annoying. You respond, "Only when I'm awake." He doesn't get it. Someone behind him does, though, and snorts loudly enough to cause a small scandal. Dinner begins, and you hover around the edges of the room, doing tiny performances for the children and light wordplay for the adults. You're careful not to overshadow anyone. Jester rule number 1, never be the center of attention at a noble's dinner unless explicitly told to be. Your job is to fill the gaps between conversations, not replace them. After dessert, the guards wave at you from their coast, and you promise, silently, with a small gesture, to try visiting them tomorrow. As the night winds down, you retreat to the servants' hallway, finally alone. You sink onto a bench, tilt your head back against the stone wall, and let your bells fall silent for a moment. Your mind drifts. Historians still argue whether jesters were cherished, tolerated, or resented. Sitting here, exhausted from errands, laughter, pressure, and non-stop performance, you suspect the answer is all of the above. And yet, for one brief, warm hour today, you belonged somewhere. And that memory might just carry you through tomorrow. You wake before sunrise again, though wake might be generous for whatever half-sleep you've just crawled out of. By now, your body has settled into that jester rhythm, light dozing, then a snap back to awareness the moment somebody passes your corner of the hall too loudly. You stretch your arms, hearing a few joints protest, and try to imagine what fully rested people feel like. Probably smug, you think? Definitely smug. By the time you're up and adjusting the bells on your cap, they always tilt to one side as if mocking you. The hall is buzzing with servants. Their footsteps echo across stone floors as they hurry bowls of barley porridge in and out of the side chambers. Even the kitchen smoke seems eager as it wanders toward the rafters. You, meanwhile, shuffle along behind them, trying very hard not to look like someone who once performed for a possibly homicidal noble and lived to tell the tale. A modest achievement, but still. The traveling expectations. Because life as a medieval court jester isn't anchored to any one spot, even though you might wish it were. A royal or noble entourage often moves across territories, touring estates, attending feasts, hosting meetings, and generally reminding everyone who owns what. And where the Lord goes, you go, like a very noisy shadow with performance anxiety. Packing for travel is always a mess. You gather your props, your wooden slapstick, your juggling pins, a few carved masks for comic bits, and stuff them into a canvas bag that's definitely seen better centuries. One of your bells falls off again. You tuck it into a pocket, deciding you'll reattach it later, though you know you absolutely won't. That's tomorrow you's problem. Servants load carts with clothing trunks and food barrels while the knights polish their armor for the occasion. You, on the other hand, get to walk. Don't take it personally. Jesters were rarely offered the comfort of a horse unless they were performing on it. One mainstream fact historians do agree on is that court entertainers often traveled long distances with the household, frequently marching beside the retinue rather than riding in comfort. Your aching feet confirm that this is painfully true. As you trudge along, you keep a cautious distance from the most humorless knights, the ones who consider your jokes disrespectful of martial dignity. They're not wrong, but still. You stick closer to the laundry girls, who at least laugh at your bell-shaped shadows dancing across the road. One even Jesus you. Perhaps when you're famous, you'll get your own donkey. You tell her that historians still argue whether jesters ever actually got donkeys, or if that's just artistic embellishment. She snorts and tells you historians argue too much anyway. You agree. As the procession moves deeper into the countryside, the air smells sharp with fresh grass and morning dew. You feel strangely exposed without the stone walls of the castle looming over you. Each step reminds you that you're technically an essential part of this mobile circus, entertainment on demand, comedy at the clap of a hand. You never know when the Lord might decide he's bored and summon you. But the road also reveals quieter moments. Between bouts of marching, you find yourself walking near the edge of the line, where trees arch overhead and soften the sunlight. A few sparrows hop along the path as if escorting you. You shake your bells gently, not enough to alert the knights, just enough to watch the birds flutter up in surprise. It's your little private rebellion. By midday, the retinue stops at a market village for provisions. The locals stare immediately. To them, you're a burst of color in a world of brown tunics and wool cloaks. Some children approach cautiously until you raise an eyebrow, one of your signature moves, and wiggle your fingers. They laugh, inching closer. So you give in and perform a small act. A single juggling pin flipped behind your back and caught with a flourish. The children squeal. But their parents? They stare with that same puzzled fear people reserve for things that don't quite fit into the expected order of the universe. A few whisper about fool magic. That's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some medieval villagers genuinely believed jesters practiced a mild form of sorcery, or at least trickery blessed by strange spirits. You know better, of course. Your only magical power is pretending your job isn't slowly turning you into a walking stress knot. Inside the tavern where the entourage lunches, you're asked to brighten the mood. The space smells of roasted onions and ale. Smoke clings to the rafters in lazy strands. You perform a short rhyme, gently mocking the weather and the muddy roads. The noble laughs, thankfully, and the rest of the table laughs because he does. You bow deeply enough that your spine cracks. Joke number 1 of this section, you silently hope the crack wasn't something medically important. Lunch ends with you slipping an extra chunk of bread into your sleeve. Jester survival technique, #12, sleeve snacks are life. When the retinue sets out again, the village behind you fades into a patchwork of roofs. Hours pass. The sun moves from warm gold to a softer haze, and the shadows stretch long and thin across the road. You feel each mile in your knees. But travel days do one useful thing. They give you time to think, to drift, to mentally rehearse jokes you might need later. And today, your thoughts settle on the constant balancing act you live with. One misplaced jest could ruin the evening. One misjudged sarcasm could offend the wrong person. It's like tiptoeing on a line stretched across a canyon, except the canyon is filled with disappointed nobles. A cart creaks nearby, jostled by stones. You glance over and see one of the guards glaring at you. You think maybe you stepped a little too close to his personal space earlier. You try to look apologetic, though you're pretty sure your default expression is accidentally rude. As sunset paints the landscape in dusky violets, the retinue finally makes camp near a wooded area. Tents rise quickly, fires crackle to life, and the smell of stewing oats fills the air. You plop onto a fallen log, grateful for any surface that isn't dirt. The laundry girl from earlier walks by and tosses you a wink. "Still not famous enough for that donkey, I see," she teases. Joke number 2, you tell her the donkey is holding out for better contract terms. Dinner is quiet. calmer than life inside stone walls. The nobles dine under a canopy while you settle with the common folk. You nibble on bread until your jaw feels like it's turning into a medieval hinge. You're tired, but not in a dramatic way, more like you've been gently kneaded into dough by the day. Night folds in. Stars prick the sky. The fire crackles like it's telling secrets. You realize you've survived another day without accidentally offending anyone important. Always cause for mild celebration. Just before you lie down on a pile of straw, you think of that noble from Section 2 with the unpredictable laugh. You make a mental note to keep at least 3 extra safe jokes ready for tomorrow. Joke number 3, maybe invent one about traveling nobles needing frequent snack breaks. No, maybe that one stays in your mental draft folder for now. You curl up as the bells on your cap give one soft jingle, and you drift into that thin medieval sleep again, half dreaming, half listening, always on call. You wake to the low murmur of the camp stirring, horses shifting in their tethered spots, the occasional bark from a guard's dog, and the distant clang of someone striking metal, probably trying to scare off a fox. Your eyelids are heavy, your body stiff, but the bells on your hat demand attention. They jingle softly as you stretch, a polite reminder that your day, like every day, has already begun whether you are ready or not. You rub the sleep from your eyes and prepare yourself for another round of walking, entertaining, and surviving the strange ecosystem of a medieval retinue. The first task arrives almost immediately. The cook hands you a basket filled with bread and dried meats. Deliver these to the scouts at the river, he instructs. Your bells punctuate each step as you carefully navigate the uneven ground, balancing the basket. This is a familiar task, yet every day it feels slightly different, as if the universe keeps testing your multitasking skills. Your feet crunch over small stones, your mind driftly cataloging the odd smells of the morning air. Wet earth, the iron tang of horse sweat, the faint scent of a nearby forest. You wonder if jesters were historically the only ones allowed to wander this freely, but historians still argue whether such freedom was true autonomy or merely the illusion of it. You arrive at the scouts' post by the river. They look at you with a mixture of amusement and confusion, no doubt intrigued by your motley and the constant jingling. One of them mutters, "Only the jester would be sent with this load," and you nod solemnly. You hand over the basket with exaggerated care, making a small joke about keeping the fish from running away, though there are no fish in the basket. The scouts laugh anyway, and you bow so low the bells nearly touch the water. Walking back to camp, you notice a small creature darting through the reeds, a rabbit, unusually bold. You watch it pause, sniffing the air, before it darts again. You make a mental note. There's something almost meditative about wildlife ignoring the chaos of humans. It's your quirky tidbit for the day. While the retinue bickers over which route to take back, you wander briefly along the riverbank, letting the soft ripple of water and distant bird calls calm your ever-alert jester nerves. By mid-morning, the nobles begin to prepare for a hunting party. You're summoned to ensure their mood stays light. You pick up a small stick from the ground and practice spinning it, pretending it's a bow for imaginary archery. One noblewoman asks if you intend to join the hunt. You shake your head. It's not your style to chase deer or birds. Your place is to be a bridge between boredom and distraction. Jesters often accompanied hunting parties, not to participate, but to entertain during long waits. They told jokes, mimed scenes of animal antics, or performed brief acrobatics, keeping spirits high. Today, you experiment with mimicking the deer that pass near the tree line, adding little twirls and exaggerated leaps. The nobles giggle, clapping politely, while the more serious knights suppress smiles. You nod internally. Mission accomplished. Later, you are tasked with organizing a small game for the children of the nobles. It involves hiding small tokens in the grass and encouraging the children to find them, all while narrating a story about mischievous forest sprites. You have to keep your story gentle but amusing, and your movements exaggerated enough to draw attention. Bells jingling softly with each gesture. One child squeals in delight when you pretend a pine cone is a tiny magical creature.
A fleeting moment of peace arrives after the game, as you sit against a tree and untie your shoes, massaging sore arches. The sunlight warms your shoulders, and you allow yourself a brief daydream. Maybe you could survive in some quiet village life, with no bells, no nobles, and no constant expectation to perform. Then you remember yesterday's incidents with the lost dog, the dropped bread, and the imaginary goose. You probably wouldn't last a day.
The afternoon brings a more challenging task. A noble requests a personalized performance for a visiting dignitary. You must juggle, tell stories, and improvise comedy while avoiding sensitive topics. Every gesture is calculated. Every word is filtered through the mental sieve of, is this acceptable, funny, and safe? One slip, and the entire audience could misunderstand, or worse, laugh at the wrong moment. Your heart beats slightly faster, but the bells keep rhythm as a reminder of who you are.
While performing, you remember a quirky historical tidbit. Some jesters in foreign courts acted as subtle spies or observers, passing notes disguised as humor. While you haven't been asked to deliver secrets yet, it's fascinating to imagine that your jokes might one day carry weight beyond laughter. Historians still argue whether jesters were clever manipulators or merely tolerated fools with occasional insight.
Evening falls, and the campfire glows like a small sun. You sit near it, letting the warmth seep into your aching muscles. The nobles have retired to their tents, leaving you to wander the perimeter, checking that no small disasters have occurred, tripping over a rope, startling a horse, or alarming the cooks. Your role as a silent guardian of the day's order continues, almost unnoticed, yet indispensable.
Night deepens. The fire crackles, shadows dance, and the stars appear like scattered jewels. You settle into your straw mat beneath a canopy, taking one last mental inventory of the day. The bread deliveries, the river, the hunts, the children's game, the dignitary performance. Each task feels minor, individually insignificant, but collectively they define your existence, a mosaic of small responsibilities wrapped in bells, laughter, and motley.
Your thoughts drift to tomorrow, the unknown collection of errands, performances, and inadvertent lessons in humility that await. You close your eyes, letting the gentle sway of the trees and the crackle of embers lull you toward sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls, and you realize that in all the chaos, all the running, all the juggling of hats, hearts, and schedules, there are small, quiet moments meant only for you. And as sleep slowly envelops your body, your last coherent thought is, you may be a jester, carrying burdens disguised as laughter, but for now, you are exactly where you need to be. The next morning arrives with the gentle persistence of a rooster somewhere behind the tents, though you're already awake long before the sun peeks over the horizon. Your joints protest, your back stiff from sleeping on straw, but the bells on your hat remind you in their own musical way that the day is beginning. You slowly rise, stretching each limb as though negotiating with them politely, and wonder how humans survive centuries without the benefit of a flexible routine. Your routine, however exhausting, is as predictable as it is relentless. After a quick wash from a shared basin, you don your motley, check your bells, and tuck your small props into your bag. Today brings a slightly different challenge. The nobles have planned a small festival for local villagers. Your role is multifaceted. You are entertainer, bridge between social classes, and occasional peacemaker. A mainstream historical fact, Jesters were often the only people allowed to interact freely across social boundaries, moving from nobles to servants to visiting merchants, while maintaining a role of humor-infused neutrality. Your hat and motley are the only keys to this peculiar freedom.
The morning begins with a practice session. You twirl sticks, rehearse quick rhymes, and run through your gestures in the grassy clearing where the festival will occur. You feel a momentary sense of control, a rarity in your day-to-day chaos. The sunlight feels warmer here, filtering through the trees and turning the motley colors into tiny patches of brilliance. It's soothing, almost magical, but the reminder of your responsibilities keeps you from lingering.
As the festival starts, villagers arrive, wide-eyed and hesitant. Children clutch the hands of their parents, peering at the bright, jingling figure stepping forward. You bend into a dramatic bow, bells chiming softly, and launch into a story about a mischievous fox who tried to sneak into a baker's shop. You mime the fox's movements, tiptoeing across the grass with exaggerated caution. The children erupt into laughter. One tugs at your sleeve, asking if the fox will get caught. You pause, thinking carefully, because even whimsical stories require structure.
Maybe, you say softly, but the fox is clever, and cleverness always deserves a second chance. A tiny moral tucked neatly into comedy.
Between performances, you run errands for the festival organizers, fetching water, adjusting tents, moving props. Each task is repetitive, yet vital. You walk past the nobles, curtsying lightly, offering quick jests about the food, the weather, or the overly enthusiastic peacocks wandering near the banquet tables. The nobles laugh politely. Some are distracted. Some watch you as though expecting an imperfection. Some seem genuinely delighted. Your bells provide a steady soundtrack, blending with the chatter, the soft clatter of cooking utensils, and the occasional bray of a donkey. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you entertain a group of children. Jesters sometimes carried small instruments, like pipes or tambourines, not only to entertain, but to signal transitions or mark the start of games. You lack formal training, but you pick up a tambourine that someone left nearby, adding a subtle rhythm to your fox story. The effect is unexpectedly charming, and the children giggle at the accidental percussion. Historians still argue whether jesters were expected to improvise music or whether most relied purely on spoken humor. Today, improvisation is your lifeline. By mid-afternoon, the sun has climbed higher and the festival's energy peaks. You find yourself running between games, storytelling, and a brief juggling act using small fruit. One noble accidentally knocks over a basket of apples. Reflexively, you catch 3 in midair before they hit the dirt, your bells jingling wildly. Everyone claps. You bow with a flourish, inwardly grateful for at least one task done without injury. Lunch is brief. A chunk of bread, a swig of watered wine, a chance to stretch your aching legs. You perch on a small barrel, watching the villagers interact, noting the curiosity and awe in their eyes. Some whisper that jesters must be part magician, part animal, part spirit. You smile softly, adjusting a stray bell. Only part spirit, you think, mostly exhaustion. Afterward, you are summoned to the central stage to perform a skit for the visiting local officials. This is delicate work. Your humor must appeal across classes, respecting nobility while delighting villagers. You choose a simple narrative. A pair of foolish rabbits attempting to organize a royal banquet. Your gestures are exaggerated, your voice playful but controlled. The audience laughs at the absurdity. No one offended, no one bored. A rare victory. You catch a glance from the steward, who nods approvingly. The rest of the afternoon blurs into a series of smaller acts. Short storytelling for the children, mild puns for the nobles, quick improvisation for servants who occasionally wander into your space. Your bells become part of the festival's rhythm, marking transitions, punctuating jokes, and signaling attention. You notice a recurring pattern. Your role is not merely to entertain, but to maintain a sense of harmony and continuity, a gentle undercurrent tying disparate people together.
A quirky distraction appears as one child offers you a daisy. You tuck it behind your hat's brim. The gesture is small but endearing, a reminder that even in a life dictated by duty, you occasionally receive tiny tokens of genuine appreciation. Later, you make a subtle reference to it in a rhyme about flowers and bells, which earns a few additional chuckles. Evening approaches. The festival winds down, and the nobles retire to their tents, leaving you to help restore order. You gather props, rearrange misplaced items, and check that none of the food has been spoiled. The villagers start to leave, expressing thanks and curiosity. One asks if you'll return for the next festival. You nod, thinking about how tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own errands, and its own gentle moments. Finally, as night descends, you retreat to a quiet corner near the campfire. Your body aches, but the warmth of the embers soothes some of the day's fatigue. You allow yourself to reflect. You have run errands, performed multiple acts, mediated interactions, and still managed to bring laughter to dozens of people. The weight of the day is heavy, but it is also meaningful. Historians still argue whether jesters were truly valued beyond entertainment, but moments like these suggest your presence matters more than you often realize. As you curl up on the straw beneath the night sky, bells softly resting, you listen to the distant murmur of the retinue, the rustle of leaves, the faint call of nocturnal creatures. Your mind drifts slowly towards sleep, replaying fragments of fox stories, juggling acts, and children's laughter. You feel the faint satisfaction of a day survived and partially mastered. The world is quiet, the camp serene, and for a brief, precious time, you are allowed to simply exist, not as a jester, not as a servant, not as an entertainer, but as yourself, small and weary and quietly triumphant. You awaken to a faint chill in the air, the kind that makes your motley feel heavier than usual. Your limbs protest gently, but the bells on your hat announce to the world that another day of jesterly obligations has begun. You stretch slowly, savoring the quiet of the early morning, though you know it won't last. Within minutes, the camp stirs. The soft shuffle of boots, the distant clink of armor, and a rooster somewhere behind the tents reminding you that time marches on whether you like it or not. After washing your face and adjusting your motley, you pack your small props for the day: juggling pins, a few carved puppets, and your improvised story scroll. Today, your role has an added twist. The Lord plans to host a small council meeting in a nearby hall, and you are tasked with keeping the mood light during the discussions. A mainstream historical fact, jesters were sometimes used to temper the tension in political or administrative meetings, providing levity that could prevent arguments from escalating. Your task today is delicate. One misjudged joke could tip the balance from harmony to chaos. You trudge toward the hall, bells chiming softly with each step. Along the way, you notice the subtle beauty of the morning: dew on the grass, the way sunlight filters through the leaves, the occasional bird hopping along the path. It's moments like these that remind you why jesters sometimes held a peculiar advantage. They observed the world in ways others were too busy or too serious to notice. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some jesters were considered unofficial record keepers, memorizing details of conversations, alliances, or incidents because their mobility and informal status allowed them access others couldn't have. Historians still argue whether this was intentional espionage or an incidental perk of the role. Arriving at the council hall, you quietly take your place in the corner, bells muted but present. The nobles assemble, discussing taxes, trade, and border disputes. Their voices rise and fall, punctuated by the occasional exasperated sigh. Your eyes scan the room, noting the subtle body language, the slight grimaces, and the stifled yawns. Timing is everything.
You know exactly when to step in, not to dominate, but to interject a gentle jest or a well-timed mime, breaking tension without undermining authority. The first opportunity arises when a knight complains about the abundance of paperwork for the upcoming harvest. You tiptoe forward, miming an exaggerated struggle with an imaginary pile of scrolls. The room bursts into quiet laughter, enough to release tension, but not enough to derail the discussion. One noble smirks at your precision, and you nod subtly, acknowledging the rare approval. Mid-morning passes in a blur of careful observation, subtle movement, and whispered jokes. You move from one side of the hall to the other, retrieving small items, carrying messages, and performing brief acrobatic flourishes when necessary. Each bell's jingle is soft, understated, yet impossible to ignore entirely. You feel like a living, breathing punctuation mark, emphasizing emotion without speaking directly. A peculiar incident arises when a visiting dignitary accidentally knocks over a goblet of water. The liquid spreads toward a stack of papers. Without thinking, you intercept it with a swift motion, spinning around and creating a small, dramatic flourish that transforms near disaster into an impromptu performance. The room gasps briefly, then bursts into laughter. You bow, silently congratulating yourself on turning a potential catastrophe into comic relief.
Later, you are asked to entertain the children accompanying the nobles. You retrieve your carved puppets and improvise a short story about a mischievous crow who tricks a lazy cat. The children are captivated, leaning forward, wide-eyed. One whispers, "Is he magic?" You smile, letting the bells jingle gently in acknowledgement. Quirky tidbits like this remind you that your presence blurs the lines between reality and imagination, a role historians still debate. Were jesters mere entertainers, or were they subtle influencers and observers of human behavior?
By midday, your arms and legs ache, and the motley feels increasingly heavy. Yet the day's work is far from over. You deliver messages, fetch water, and perform small improvisations during council breaks. The nobles grow accustomed to your rhythm, understanding when your humor is necessary and when your silence carries its own weight. You feel a subtle satisfaction knowing that, for all the running and juggling, your presence maintains a fragile equilibrium.
In the afternoon, a minor skirmish erupts over seating arrangements for a banquet. You intervene with exaggerated gestures, miming an absurd scenario in which everyone is riding invisible horses. Laughter erupts, tension dissolves, and order is restored. Your subtle influence in these matters is invisible, yet undeniable. A reminder of how jesters could shape outcomes without overt authority. As the sun lowers, you are finally allowed a brief respite. You wander toward a quiet courtyard, watching the shadows stretch across the stone walls. The day's exertion settles into your muscles, a gentle ache that is oddly comforting. You reflect on the series of small interventions, minor performances, and quiet observations that defined the day. Despite exhaustion, you recognize the unique position you hold. Essential yet peripheral, visible yet overlooked, jester yet observer.
Night begins to fall. The campfire glows near the tents, sending warmth across the gathering space. You sit quietly, letting your bells rest for a while, savoring the fleeting peace. The world is calm, and for the first time today, you allow yourself to simply exist. You replay the events of the day in your mind, the council's laughter, the children's wide-eyed wonder, the near catastrophe with the spilled goblet, and the subtle triumphs of maintaining harmony.
As you settle onto your straw mat beneath the darkening sky, you feel a quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow will bring new errands, new performances, and fresh challenges. But for now, you are content. The bells rest silently, and the night wraps you in gentle darkness. You drift toward sleep with the knowledge that, for all the exhaustion, all the running, and all the subtle juggling of moods and expectations, you have done what jesters do best. You have brought levity, maintained balance, and survived another day. The morning greets you with a soft, golden light, spilling across the tents and warming the earth beneath your worn shoes. You rise slowly, stretching every joint, feeling the accumulated stiffness from days of marching, performing, and endlessly juggling small responsibilities. The bells on your hat sway lightly with each movement, as though nudging you awake with the tiniest chime. Outside, the retinue is already stirring. Horses neigh, servants scurry, and somewhere a dog barks in an optimistic, slightly panicked manner. You take a deep breath, accepting that today, like every day, will be long, peculiar, and peppered with both absurdity and expectation. Breakfast is brief: a hunk of bread, a slice of preserved cheese, and the comforting, if slightly sour, taste of watered wine. You nibble slowly, savoring what little peace the morning offers. Your motley is already on, your props secured in their bag. Today, you're assigned to accompany a hunting party led by the Lord, a task that combines long stretches of standing, sudden bursts of movement, and the ever-present risk of accidentally offending someone with a misplaced joke or gesture. Jesters often accompanied hunting parties not as participants, but as morale boosters, storytellers, and observers, ensuring the hunters remained entertained and engaged during the long, sometimes tedious hours. You march alongside the hunters, your bells a gentle counterpoint to the rhythmic clatter of hooves on the dirt path. The forest around you smells of damp earth, pine resin, and the faint tang of wild animals. You keep your eyes alert, scanning for errant branches, unexpected puddles, and the occasional fox. Even though you do not carry a weapon, your role requires a constant, subtle attentiveness. One wrong step, one trip, one loud bell in the wrong moment, and you risk embarrassment, or worse, mild wrath from an impatient noble. By mid-morning, the hunters have taken positions, their attention focused on a distant clearing where deer are rumored to roam. You settle on a fallen log at the edge of the group, attempting to remain unobtrusive while still performing your duties. You quietly narrate stories of forest animals to the children accompanying the party, imitating the movements of foxes, birds, and the occasional overzealous rabbit. The children giggle at your exaggerated motions, while the adults chuckle politely, some of them amused, others unsure how to respond. Your bells jingle softly with each gesture, a subtle punctuation of your movements. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces as you perform. Some jesters were trained in rudimentary animal mimicry, both for entertainment and to help in hunting-related distractions. Your performances are far less formal, more improvisational, but the effect is similar: amusement, engagement, and a reminder that even in serious or tedious circumstances, humor and levity can transform the experience. Historians still argue whether this skill was widespread among jesters or merely a specialized talent possessed by a few gifted individuals. Midday brings a sudden flurry of activity. One of the hunters misfires an arrow, narrowly missing a noble's hat and prompting a flurry of apologies and nervous laughter. You seize the opportunity to leap lightly, spinning an imaginary arrow in your fingers and offering a mock salute to the would-be archer. The tension dissolves instantly, replaced by chuckles and relieved smiles. You realize yet again that your presence serves as a buffer, a gentle valve releasing pressure in unpredictable moments. After the excitement, the party settles near a stream to rest and refresh. You wander a short distance away, listening to the water's soft burble, the wind rustling through the leaves, and the occasional bird call. For a moment, the world seems to pause. You feel the familiar ache in your legs, your shoulders, and your back, but also a faint sense of accomplishment. You have survived the morning's exertions, performed your duties with careful precision, and even managed to entertain without misstep.
As you return to the hunters, a minor mishap occurs. A hound escapes from its leash and chases a squirrel into the underbrush, sending leaves and twigs flying. You dash after it, using exaggerated gestures and playful noises to guide the animal back. The hound's owner scowls briefly, but softens as you bow dramatically, bells jingling in a triumphant fanfare. It is a small victory, yet in your world, small victories are precious.
By late afternoon, the party has moved to a sun-dappled meadow, the perfect stage for a more structured performance. You gather the children, nobles, and servants into a loose circle and perform a short, improvised skit about a group of birds who argue endlessly over a single breadcrumb. Your arms fly in wide arcs, your bells punctuating every gesture, and your voice shifts between exaggerated whispers and booming proclamations. Laughter spreads through the group, light and infectious, carrying across the meadow. Even the serious adults allow themselves a smile, momentarily freed from the rigidity of their roles.
Between acts, you run errands, fetching water, adjusting a tent flap, or carrying messages. Each task blends seamlessly into your performances, creating a continuous thread of motion, humor, and utility. You feel the subtle thrill of being indispensable, even in a world that often treats jesters as peripheral. Your mind wanders briefly to the peculiar privileges your role affords: access to conversations, insight into both noble and servant perspectives, and the freedom to observe human behavior with a rare combination of proximity and detachment. As the sun sinks lower, casting long shadows across the meadow, you perform a final act, a brief juggling routine with sticks, stones, and a small piece of bread from your pocket. The children cheer, the nobles applaud, and the servants grin. You bow deeply, allowing the bells to jingle softly in your farewell. Exhaustion tugs at your body, but satisfaction fills your mind. You have endured, entertained, and maintained a delicate balance among diverse personalities and unpredictable circumstances.
Night falls. The campfire glows warmly near the edge of the clearing. You settle onto your straw mat, listening to the gentle murmur of the retinue winding down. Your body aches. Your motley feels heavier than it did at dawn, but your spirit is oddly light. You replay fragments of the day, the playful fox stories, the runaway hound, the improvised skit, and the brief moments of serene observation along the river.
As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the strange paradox of your existence. You are both indispensable and peripheral, visible and overlooked, performer and observer. And yet, through all the errands, all the performances, all the juggling of expectations, you have survived another day. And in doing so, you have quietly shaped the world around you. The bells rest against your shoulders, soft and rhythmic, as night envelops the camp. You close your eyes, letting the gentle darkness cradle you, and allow sleep to carry you away, momentarily free from duty, movement, and expectation. Dawn arrives slowly, stretching pale fingers across the camp and stirring the world with gentle insistence. You awaken to the familiar sounds of the retinue, the soft murmur of voices, the metallic rattle of armor, the distant clatter of horses shifting in their tethers. Your body protests mildly as you rise, limbs stiff from another night on straw, but the bells on your hat remind you, with quiet insistence, that your role never truly sleeps. You stretch deliberately, letting your muscles crack and sigh in protest, and prepare for the day ahead. Today, your task involves accompanying a diplomatic envoy traveling through a nearby village. The Lord wants to impress visiting dignitaries with a well-ordered entourage and charming diversions, which means your presence is essential. A mainstream historical fact: jesters often accompany diplomats and emissaries, providing levity, performing short acts, and smoothing social interactions that might otherwise become tense or awkward. Your role, delicate and nuanced, is to keep spirits light without drawing undue attention to yourself.
As you march toward the village, the morning air carries the earthy scent of dew-soaked grass and the faint tang of livestock. Bells chime softly with each step, announcing your presence without overwhelming it. You glance at the villagers emerging from their homes, faces curious and wary. Children peek from behind fences, whispering and giggling at the motley figure with jingling bells. You offer a small bow and a gentle flourish of your arms, and they giggle even more, intrigued by the strange, colorful interloper in their quiet morning.
The village square is alive with preparation. Stalls being set up, livestock herded, merchants arranging goods. You weave through the scene, performing small tricks, miming exaggerated negotiations between imaginary merchants, and juggling a trio of apples you swiped from a basket earlier. The children are delighted, clapping and squealing, while adults watch with polite amusement. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some medieval villages, jesters were thought to carry a hint of magic, a belief reinforced by their colorful attire and uncanny ability to charm both adults and children alike. Historians still argue whether this perception was widespread or limited to specific regions, but today it feels real. Mid-morning, the dignitaries arrive, clad in finery, their expressions a mix of curiosity and practiced restraint. Your role is subtle. You must entertain without overshadowing, amuse without offending. You mime a series of exaggerated bows and curtsies, act out a brief story about a cat and a mischievous mouse negotiating peace, and punctuate each movement with the soft, rhythmic jingling of your bells. The dignitaries chuckle, some more quietly than others, but the effect is immediate. Tension eases, smiles spread, and the atmosphere lightens.
A minor challenge arises when a noble misplaces a document, sending several attendants into a mild panic. You step forward with exaggerated seriousness, pretending to investigate the mysterious disappearance, spinning an imaginary magnifying glass, and inspecting the ground with dramatic flair. Laughter erupts, breaking the nervous energy and allowing the attendants to recover their composure. Your subtle influence, invisible yet undeniable, ensures that decorum is maintained without overt interference. By midday, the village hosts a short feast in honor of the visiting dignitaries. You circulate among the tables, performing brief acts of wordplay, balancing tricks, and storytelling, ensuring that both noble and commoner alike remain entertained. You notice a small child staring at your hat with fascination. You tilt it gently, letting a bell jingle softly, and the child giggles. These small interactions, seemingly trivial, remind you of your unique position. You are both observer and participant, bridge and boundary, entertainer and silent counselor. In the afternoon, a playful mishap occurs. A goat escapes its pen and begins nibbling at unattended baskets. You dash after it, jingling bells and waving arms, transforming a potential minor disaster into an impromptu comedic performance. The dignitaries laugh, the villagers cheer, and the goat is gently herded back to its enclosure. You bow dramatically, pleased with the seamless blend of utility and entertainment. Later, you are asked to perform a storytelling session for the children and curious villagers. You pull from your bag a small set of carved puppets and enact a tale of two rival birds trying to build nests in the same tree. Your arms fly, your voice shifts between dramatic tones, and your bells punctuate the story's climax. Children laugh, adults smile, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of connecting with an audience on multiple levels. By evening, the festivities wind down. The dignitaries retire, villagers disperse, and the Lord gives quiet approval, nodding at your performance. You gather your props, pack your belongings, and assist in restoring order to the village square. Each act, each step, each jingle of the bells has served its purpose, entertaining,
easing tension and maintaining harmony. As night falls, you find a quiet spot beneath a tree, bells resting lightly against your shoulders. You watch the stars emerge, one by one, and listen to the faint sounds of the returning camp. Murmured conversations, the shuffle of boots, the low whinny of horses. Your body aches, your motley feels heavier than it did that morning, but your spirit is calm. The day's challenges, performances, and minor disasters have been met and survived. You reflect on the subtle influence you wield, the quiet authority in your role, and the rare moments of genuine connection that make each day worthwhile.
Finally, you settle onto your straw mat near the campfire, letting the warmth seep into your tired muscles. You replay the day in your mind, the playful goats, the children's laughter, the dignitaries' amused expressions, and the small triumphs that came without recognition. Bells jingle softly as you adjust your position, a gentle lullaby accompanying the slow descent into sleep. The world around you is quiet, the night serene, and for a few precious moments, you are free, not as a jester, not as an entertainer, but simply as yourself, small, weary, and quietly triumphant.
The morning begins softly, with sunlight spilling through the gaps in the canvas tents, warming the straw beneath you. You wake slowly, muscles stiff but familiar with the gentle protest, and stretch, letting the bells on your hat sway lightly. Somewhere in the camp, a horse shifts in its tether, a dog barks, and you catch the faint smell of breakfast cooking. You take a deep breath, knowing that today's tasks, like every day, will demand patience, agility, and a quiet sense of humor. Your first responsibility is simple yet delicate. Deliver a message to a neighboring estate while keeping the marching entourage orderly. As you trudge along, bells chiming softly, you observe the rhythm of the world, the crunch of gravel beneath feet, the whisper of wind through the trees, the occasional bird hopping along the path. Each sound, each scent, each glance reminds you of the peculiar life you lead, always present, often overlooked, and yet subtly influential. Historians still argue whether jesters truly held sway in political or diplomatic matters, or if their influence was mostly imagined. Either way, today you feel every step carries significance. By mid-morning, the entourage pauses near a small village. Your role shifts again. Entertainer, bridge between classes, observer of behavior. Children approach cautiously, peeking at your colorful motley and jingling bells. You bend low, perform a small juggling routine, and add a gentle rhyme about a mischievous fox and a lazy goose. Laughter spreads across the children, while adults smile politely, some intrigued by your improvisation, others wondering at the subtle authority of your presence. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some jesters were rumored to carry small charms or trinkets, believed to bring luck or ward off misfortune, though whether these items held true power or were merely symbolic is a matter of historical debate. After the village, the retinue moves on to a nearby river for a brief rest. You sit on a smooth stone, watching the water ripple and listening to the soft murmur of the camp settling. A few children follow you, curious about your props and eager for another story. You oblige with a tale of a cunning rabbit who outwits a boastful hawk, punctuated with exaggerated gestures and jingling bells. The rhythmic motion, combined with the soft river sounds, creates a calm, almost hypnotic atmosphere, and even the adults pause to observe, briefly forgetting their worries. By afternoon, the day's more formal tasks arrive. The Lord holds a meeting with visiting officials, and you are present to maintain levity without overstepping. You move subtly through the room, offering well-timed expressions, quiet miming, and gentle gestures that release tension without drawing undue attention. A minor incident occurs when an official spills a cup of wine, and you step in with exaggerated motions, pretending to perform a ritual to restore order. Laughter softens the moment, and the meeting resumes smoothly. Your bells, muted but present, mark a rhythm of subtle control.
Late afternoon brings a short break. You wander near the edge of the camp, noticing the interplay of sunlight and shadow on the trees. The air is warm and smells faintly of herbs and smoke. You feel the aches of the week, sore joints, tired muscles, and a slight tightness in your back. Yet alongside the discomfort is a sense of quiet accomplishment. Each act, each joke, each intervention has been small but meaningful. You reflect on your role, essential yet peripheral, visible yet often unnoticed, balancing humor, observation, and service in ways few understand.
As evening falls, a festival of sorts begins within the camp, a gathering of nobles, attendants, and occasional villagers. Your performance here is multifaceted: juggling, storytelling, and improvisation. You move fluidly between groups, ensuring laughter and engagement without overwhelming any individual. The children are particularly attentive, eyes wide, and you improvise a short skit about birds competing over a single worm, exaggerating their tiny struggles and adding soft jingles for emphasis. Adults watch with quiet smiles, some chuckling, others simply enjoying the rhythm of your movements.
Night settles in with a hush. The campfire glows, embers flickering like tiny stars against the darkening sky. You gather your props, straighten your motley, and walk quietly among the tents, ensuring everything is in order. You notice the small details, the way the shadows fall, the quiet conversations, the gentle hum of the night air. Even after all the days of travel, performance, and subtle influence, these moments of observation remain precious, grounding you in the rhythm of life.
Finally, you settle onto your straw mat near the fire, letting the warmth seep into your aching muscles. You replay the day in fragments: the fox and the goose, the juggling acts, the minor mishaps, the children's laughter, the dignitaries' smiles. Your body aches, but your mind is calm, satisfied by another day survived and subtly shaped. You allow yourself to linger in the quiet, listening to the soft crackle of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of leaves.
Now it is time for the wind down. Let your body sink deeper into the straw, muscles releasing tension slowly. Imagine the camp fading into soft shadows, the bells of your hat quiet for the night. Every breath grows slower, more even, as the cool night air brushes your skin. Your thoughts drift gently, revisiting small, comforting moments: the fox's cunning, the children's bright eyes, the ripple of the river. Let the day's exertions melt away, leaving only calm. You are safe here, rested and free to drift, carried by the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat and the soft crackle of the embers.
Sleep comes slowly, effortlessly, folding you into a serene, quiet world where laughter, bells, and motley blend seamlessly into gentle night. End of script. Sweet dreams.